So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about variables and how we use them, what ways we should implement them in our code. So we'll go over let, var, const, all of the basics there, and some data types. All right, so in looking at when to use let, var, and const, there are a few things to keep into consideration. One of those that is not often covered right at the beginning of JavaScript is scope. So scope is where different variables can be seen and used. So in this situation that I have here, I have the code here that declares A as 5 and B as 1. Then if A is greater than B, then we're going to declare using var test. And test is just a string that says this is a test. And then we're going to take let and use let to declare test2. Now, as you can see, we get outside of this conditional here. So when we come outside of the conditional, I console test, which was created using var, and we can see over here in our console that it is still visible. That is declaring it more as a global variable. It can be used outside of the function. It can be used outside of the conditional. It's not looped in to where it's only going to be used inside that space. Now, if you'll notice, I used let to declare test2. Test2 says this is a test2, and I try to console it out in much the same way that I did var. But we don't actually get it out. Instead, we get this uncaught reference error for test2 because it hasn't been defined. That's because let will only work within the scope of this conditional unless it's declared outside. So where it's declared outside up here, I can use it outside. So if I console log B, I get 1. But since on line 6, we declare it inside the conditional, it is only used inside the conditional. Outside, it doesn't exist anymore. So if I come down here and I say let test2 equal this is test2, it will work in this case because I've declared it out here. But before that, if I change this variable to test2, it's undeclared at this point, and so we don't even run the second code. But again, after it's been declared down here, we can use it even though it's being used up here. So let's say console log test2 here. Now we get it consoling at both places. Now const is a different beast. With const, we're going to declare something using that in a situation in which it is never going to change. So let's say we're using something like the number for pi. We could say const pi equals, and then 3.14. You could go on. So in this situation, pi doesn't change. It's a fixed number in math. We're never going to use something different. If you were using a fixed tax rate that we knew Congress wasn't going to change, say there was a random one that had been permanently put in place and just never changed, that would be a situation in which you would use const outside of the scope of a function. Now, if you're declaring a function though, so let's say we have function sum, and we're going to take A, and then we're going to take B. So let's go on back up here and declare A. So we're going to let A equal 1, and we'll let B equal 2. So in this case, we're declaring a function called sum. It's going to take in A and B, and let's say const answer equals A plus B, and then we return answer. So now we're going to come down here and console log sum, and we're going to pass it A and B so that it runs. Now we're in a situation where answer can't be used again. So let's try to use it. Since we declare it here using const, and it's going to have those, and now we're going to look at it here, and it's coming up undefined. Now, if I pass something else in to my function, so let's say console.log, and we're going to call on sum, and we're going to pass it 5 and 10. So we should get back 15. In this case, when it returns 5 and 10, and we've got to get rid of this one because it's causing an error. But when we sum 5 and 10, it returns 15 and it runs just fine, even though what it's returning is answer. So answer will change because each time the function is called, it creates answer as a brand new thing every time. And that is a completely appropriate use of const. Const is also great, like we mentioned, for things like pi. But if it's something that you plan on using anywhere else, then you're going to want to use let. Now, var has been what we call deprecated, which means we don't really use it anymore. There are going to be situations you run into it, and the thing to remember with var is just anything that you do with a var variable, whether inside a function or outside a function, is going to change that variable. So its scope is global. And we don't really like that in modern JavaScript. We want things to be narrowed down so that they don't break somebody else's code in some other part of the code. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of that. Now, the other thing that I wanted to take a few minutes to kind of comment on are data types. With all three of these, we can use any of the common data types. So whether that is numbers, or integers and floats, or strings, or whether we're using booleans or we're doing arrays, which are just lists of objects or lists of numbers, strings, booleans, things like that. And then objects, which are collections of properties. We can use these focused ways of declaring those variables using these data types too. They don't really change their behavior from one situation to the next. Scope is still pretty much the way we explained it in the beginning. So it doesn't matter which one of these data types you're looking at when you're using these three methods for how to declare a variable. They're still going to behave in much the same way. So when you're using these, keep that in mind. In most cases, you're going to want to use let. If you're in a function and you're not going to be changing that variable within the function, you're just going to do something like we did here, then feel free to use const because it's a little more secure as far as not being manipulated outside of what you're telling it to do right there. Otherwise, it's not a super important thing that you use one over the other inside of a function because they both have the same scope. So hopefully that covers a little bit about scope, a little bit about variables, and a little bit about how we use them, and that data types don't really change anything for us as far as the behavior. Luckily, you are in a situation here to where if you're in your VS Code coding environment, you can play around with them and see what happens just like we did. So I encourage you to get out there, break your code, play around with it, see what you can get done with it, because that's really the best way to learn when you're learning coding.